It's been over 4 years since Breath of the Wild came out. 4 years full of experimenting, theorizing, and tormenting Flower Blight Ganon. Breath of the Wild certainly still holds up well, as many people with hundreds or even thousands of hours put into the game can confirm. However, with so many people playing the game for so long, it's become clear that some elements of the game could just use some improvement. And this isn't a bad thing by any stretch. In fact, it goes to show how much greater Breath of the Wild's sequel can be, so long as these flaws are improved upon. That's why today, I'd like to talk about 5 aspects of Breath of the Wild that I'd like the sequel to build on further. So, if you like pressing big red buttons that probably won't end the world, be sure to subscribe real quick, since it's time to get started with item number 1, the weapon system. Breath of the Wild has an absolutely massive range of weapons you can carry with you. Over 100 different melee weapon types can be found throughout the game, with more than 20 bows and around 30 shields. Considering that these are only different weapon types and not individual weapons, you've got around thousands of weapons across the world of Breath of the Wild. That, frankly, is a lot of items to collect, and as the game progresses, most players will quickly discard most of these items the minute they get them. That is, unless you find someone who's really fond of tree branches. Picking and choosing weapons like this isn't always an option though. At the beginning of the game, your inventory is limited to 8 melee weapons, 5 bows, and 4 shields. It isn't a whole lot, so whenever you run into monsters and break a weapon, you probably will pick up what they left behind. In addition, it forces you to switch between weapons tactically, using a bow when you can afford to spare some arrows, and going in close when you need to be a bit more personal. In contrast to the early game, Breath of the Wild's late game sees most players toting around a large number of Royal Claymores, Lionel Bows, and other such high-tier weapons. When you reach a certain point, combat with basic enemies hardly poses a challenge unless you mess up really badly. Or you encounter a high-level Lionel, which some players still see no challenge in. In other words, things get easy. Even the final boss is a joke if you even get a couple divine beasts and store up loads of food, which we'll get to later. But this easiness isn't really a problem for Breath of the Wild, to me at least. It's simply a part of the game, a sign that you've truly mastered the wild and everything it can throw at you. I feel like the sequel, on the other hand, would be perfect for a more limited inventory. Essentially, give players less weapon slots, so we can't just toss aside every Boko club that comes our way. Anyone who's tried the trial of the sword with a low weapon capacity will know that there's a very unique challenge there, and picking the right or wrong weapon can determine the outcome of a lot of fights. To go alongside this, I think every weapon, except for those stolen from common enemies, should have a slightly higher durability. Also, weapons shouldn't show up in chests nearly as often. These changes would account for the smaller inventory and increase the value of new weapons, respectively. To replace those lost weapons, inventory and quiver expansions could be stashed away in chests around the world. Not so many that they become worthless, but enough to grow your inventory to a good bit larger than it starts in Breath of the Wild. The specific number of weapon slots you start and end with could even change based on what difficulty the game is set at, if they add more options like that. In the end though, that's just an idea. Let's move on to the second thing I'd like to see reworked, the cooking system. At this point, if you're at all up to speed with Breath of the Wild, you probably know that if you get nearly obliterated by a strong enemy, but haven't died yet, all you need to do is simply pause, wolf down a few dozen apples to heal yourself completely, and resume the fight. Eating food is possible at any time when the screen is paused, making it possible to totally circumvent the consequences of a tough fight. Except, of course, for early on, when you don't have much food to consume. I feel like this also could be solved by reducing the number of items Link can carry at a time, both ingredients and cooked meals alike, but there's another idea that I like as well to fix this, so I'll talk about that one here. Make Link eat meals right when he cooks them. Anytime you come across a cooking pot, this would make them more valuable, as they would be the only places where you can power up and heal more effectively than out in the wild. Normally you can carry meals around for hours on end, but this method would add a bit more realism and a bit more challenge to staying at full health. I think it would still be fine to eat regular ingredients like apples or raw eggs, but limiting the cooked meals would be an interesting challenge that I wouldn't mind seeing in the sequel. Item number 3 that we're taking a hammer to is enemy variety. Breath of the Wild has around 20 different regular enemy types, with around 4 overworld boss types and the more specific bosses of Master Koga, Monk Maz Koshia, the Blight Ganons, and Calamity Ganon. This is a pretty solid range of enemies for any Zelda game, but quite frankly, Breath of the Wild and its sequel aren't just any Zelda games. The map is so massive that when exploring for so long, the same enemies begin to get a bit boring without much variation. Sure, there are elemental variants of almost all enemies, plus the stronger levels of some enemies, and a few are even unique to certain areas. Overall though, the enemy variety is just a bit lacking. So, what is there to do but draw on Zelda's incredible library of enemies? I mean, you've got Armos, Death Armos, Dark Nuts, Iron Knuckles, Dynalphos, Eralphos, Levers, and so much more. Just to make about 4 or 5 unique to each dungeon in the game, plus sprinkle 10 or 20 more across the overworld, and your problem is solved. Now, on to the next item. Breath of the Wild, for better or worse, gets a lot of criticism on its dungeons. Some say the Divine Beasts aren't real dungeons, others say they just aren't varied enough, and some just plain don't like them. And these are all valid things to consider, especially considering that the Shrine mini-dungeons all had the same atmosphere as the bigger Divine Beasts. It's likely that the sequel won't reuse these same concepts for new dungeons, but dungeons are to be expected nonetheless. So, how could the new game do better on that front? My first suggestion would be to make enough dungeons that you'll never feel too far from one. Maybe use the typical format of 3 starting dungeons that then give way to 6 or 8 more dungeons. Each wave of dungeons should be playable in whatever order to maintain the open air aspect of Breath of the Wild, and each one should have a different theme and location. Though it would be nice if there are some dungeons that don't feel like generic, elementally themed puzzle houses. A couple wouldn't be too bad, but Breath of the Wild's dungeons were already technically elemental dungeons, so it's probably best not to overuse that particular aspect. One other thing that I think dungeons need are unique enemies with unique weapons. This kind of ties into 2 of the prior points, but done right, it would really give a reason to go back to the dungeons. If bosses or mini-bosses will respawn with a Blood Moon kind of event, that would let us go back and fight them again. And if each one has a strong weapon with special properties, that would make the rematch worthwhile. Add in the randomized weapon buffs that Breath of the Wild already applies to weapons carried by enemies, and you suddenly have the option to go weapon hunting across the 6 or 8 dungeons across the map. Finally, for point 5, I'd like to direct your attention to the villain department. This part kind of overlaps again with enemies, but now we're looking more at the bosses and main antagonists of the game. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that Breath of the Wild didn't see a lot of characterization of its main antagonist, Calamity Ganon. He certainly was a cunning beast, trapping Hyrule with their own guardians pitted against them, but unless you count his totally characterless Blight minions, we don't even see Calamity Ganon for the better part of the game. Thankfully, the sequel is set up to fix that very nicely, with our good old Ganondorf waking up to be a little ray of sunshine on Hyrule once again. However, I want more. If you take a look at the previous Zelda games, we've gotten a lot of intriguing antagonists who served right alongside the main antagonist, such as Girahim or Zant. For some reason, Breath of the Wild 2 feels like the perfect game for such a character. Someone who may even backstab Ganondorf at the last moment, or simply serves as an interesting character for their motivations and personality. So, why not include someone like this? Or, if we're really reaching, why not add 4? Imagine 4 anti-champions, either corrupted by Ganon or by their own malice, one from each tribe in Hyrule. It would really put a dark twist on things, showing that even the peaceful people of Hyrule can be corrupted by power, and it would give the new champions a little more to do than just sit around and look nice from the original game. Of course, that's all just some thoughts. My ideas for the sequel and how it could build on what Breath of the Wild, and the series as a whole for that matter, has laid out already. What have you to say on this matter though? Would you care if any of this makes its way into the sequel, or would you choose much different things to improve? Perhaps you just want to fix rain and that's it. Let me know in the comments. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time you're in the Legend Zone.